Most people believe governments control their own money. They think presidents decide the economy, parliaments set financial policies, and central banks exist to protect the public. But what if almost everything you've been taught about who controls money is only half the story? What if behind the world's central banks, behind the interest rates, behind the inflation targets, behind the debt that nations drown in, there exists a quiet network of power that never appears on election ballots, never faces the public, and never answers to democracy? A system so old, so deeply rooted, and so quietly protected that exposing it isn't just controversial. It's like shining a flashlight into a vault no one was ever supposed to open. Today, we open it. Welcome to The Secret Owners of the World's Central Banks Finally Exposed. Setting the stage, background, tension, and teasing a twist. To understand who really owns the world's money, you must first understand something uncomfortable. Central banks look public. They sound national. They claim independence. Federal Reserve, Bank of England, European Central Bank. But here's the twist. Most central banks were not born public. They were not created to protect citizens. They were created to protect someone else. And the deeper you go, the more tangled it becomes. Secretive shareholder structures, private banking dynasties, international agreements that override national sovereignty, and a financial operating system designed long before modern democracy. But this story didn't start in Washington. It didn't even start in London. To uncover the real owners of the modern financial world, we need to go back to a Europe drowning in war, kings drowning in debt, and bankers discovering a new kind of power. A kind of power that doesn't need armies. Because when you control the money, you control everything else. Origins, where the system really began. The roots of today's central banking system trace back to the late 1600s. England was bankrupt after endless wars. The king needed money, but taxes had reached their breaking point. Enter a coalition of wealthy merchants and banking families. They offered a deal. We will lend the crown the money it needs. But in return, we want something bigger. We want the right to create money and loan it to the government with interest. In 1694, that deal became the Bank of England, the first major central bank in the modern world. It was not a government institution. It was a private corporation, owned by private shareholders, with the power to issue the nation's money. This was the birth of a new model: governments borrow. Bankers lend. Citizens pay the interest. This model spread across Europe, then to America, and eventually became the default system for nearly every country on earth. By the early 1900s, the idea of a privately influenced central bank quietly steering a nation's financial fate was no longer radical. It was normal. The rise from national banks to global power network. Fast forward to 1910. A secret meeting takes place on Jekyll Island, a private resort off the coast of Georgia. Present were a group of financiers and politicians representing some of the most powerful banking interests in the United States. Their mission: to design the blueprint for America's central bank. Not a public institution, not a democratic institution, but an entity that would look federal, sound federal, and yet remain tied to private banking interests behind the scenes. In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act passed during the holiday season, with many members of Congress absent. And just like that, the world's most influential central bank was born. From that point forward, commercial banking families would have representation. Private regional reserve banks would become part of the structure. The ability to create money and loan it to the US government would move into semi-private hands. A pattern was forming. A global central banking network started emerging, an interconnected architecture linking the Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, Banque de France, Reichsbank, and later, the Bank for International Settlements. By the mid-20th century, this small network had become the beating heart of the global financial system. A system not controlled by voters, but by a coordinated ecosystem of central bankers and commercial banking interests. Breaking point when the system revealed its true power. The world got its first real glimpse of who holds the power in 1971. The US dollar was supposed to be backed by gold. Countries could exchange dollars for physical metal. But the spending on war and social programs had exploded. America didn't have enough gold left. So President Nixon made a dramatic announcement. The dollar would no longer be convertible into gold. Most people remember the speech. But few understand what it meant. It meant the world's currencies were now backed by nothing except trust in governments and the monetary decisions of central bankers. After that moment, money creation could expand infinitely. Debt could grow without limit. And financial power shifted even further away from elected governments and toward the people who controlled monetary policy. Nixon ended the gold standard. But in doing so, he handed the keys to the global monetary kingdom to the central banking network. Fallout: what happens when money has no limit? What followed was predictable. Governments borrowed more. Central banks printed more. The financial sector gained unprecedented influence. Wealth inequality spiked. And the global economy became addicted to cheap money. Recessions, inflation cycles, and debt crises became recurring features of the world economy. Every time the system wobbles, central banks step in. Cut rates. Print liquidity. Bail out financial institutions. And every time they do, the system becomes more dependent on them. Which leads us to the most overlooked part of this entire story. Central banks cannot fail. Because the global economy cannot survive without them. And that gives them more power than any elected government. Failed fixes: attempts to control central bank power. Over the last century, multiple leaders tried to break or limit this system. Some attempted to nationalize their central banks. Others tried to issue state-controlled money. Some tried to audit or regulate the private ownership structures behind them. In nearly every case, the attempts failed. The reforms were reversed, or the leader pushing them was removed from power. Why? Because dismantling a central bank is like trying to remove the brain from a living organism. The entire system collapses without it. This is why politicians fear them, and why global markets listen to central bankers more than presidents. Modern parallels and shocking data. Today, the story has escalated. Over 100 countries are exploring central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Global debt has surpassed $300 trillion. Only 8 people on Earth control more wealth than half of humanity. And over 60 central banks coordinate policy through the BIS, a single institution immune from national laws. The core pattern hasn't changed since 1694. Governments borrow. Central banks control. Citizens absorb the consequences. The names are different. The technology is different. But the power structure is the same. A small group shapes the financial fate of billions. Quietly, technically, and without meaningful democratic oversight. Takeaways, a warning, and a call to action. Central banks were not designed to be democratic. Their origins lie in private agreements, not public mandates. When money becomes debt, power concentrates. The more a nation borrows, the more influence its central bank gains. The system survives because people don't question it. The less the public understands money, the easier it is to control them with it. Warning. As digital money rises, the power of central banks is about to reach a level the world has never seen. The question is no longer, who owns the banks? The real question is, what happens when the people who control the money also control the data, the transactions, and the permissions for how money moves? The next chapter of this story is being written right now. Call to action, natural, not salesy. If you want more stories that expose the hidden mechanics of global finance and reveal what's really shaping your economic future, make sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who still believes governments control everything. Because the deeper we look, the more we realize, money doesn't just shape the world. The people who control money do.